All right, we are recording. All right, so now we're going to look at transitioning. So kind of the short, cheaty way of getting good at dueling sword. I'll might change back to my actual sword. So switching to a stick was good for seeing hand position, but for this, you can see my tip. The cheaty way of learning how to use this weapon is you need to learn what the hand positions are. So, just the angles. If you can remember the hand positions but not what they're called, that's okay. The important thing is you can physically do the movements. But then you want to learn how to move between them. And you do this with three types of movement. There's a disengage, where you just dip your sword in a semicircle. Actually, I might switch back to the stick just because it's got a bigger tip. So you can all see that. And while I'm here, just to make your lives even easier, because, I'm doing my, I don't make friends easily, so I need to be nice to the friends I have. I'm going to put a bit of red tape on the end of my stick just to make it as easy to see as possible. So hopefully that's a bit easy for you to see, because this is a very, very fine movement. But there are disengages where I just draw a little half circle to dip around my opponent's top sword. There are what are called derobements, where I do like a quarter circle. So not only am I changing sides, I'm also changing lines. And then there's cutovers, where I do a little half circle, but this time it's coming over the top. Incidentally, these are called cutovers because with a cutting weapon, that's the movement you tend to use to preface all of your cuts. So, a bit of cross weapon, interplay there. Cool. So I'm just going to quickly make sure that. Cool. Just going to make sure. Just had to request to mute everyone, so I'm just going to quickly put everyone on mute. Right. So, yep, that's feel good. Right. So, the thing about each of these movements is that they're designed to move you between hand positions. So if I come on guard, my opponent and I engage in cart like this, and I say, and I'm like, oh, well, I don't like being engaged in cart, it's on the line. To move to 6, I disengage, I move my hand over, and I just come to the position of 6. In fact, in some cases, you won't even move your hand. You'll just disengage so that all of a sudden now you're engaged. Now engaged in the outside line. Although I do recommend moving your hand to make sure that if your opponent thrusts reactively, they'll be guided down your sword and away from you rather than into you because you opened yourself up to thrust. So let's just practice these disengagements. So to disengage, starting from our medium guard, all you do is you roll your thumb and your fingers. I'll come close so you can see the movement. So all I'm doing is that. I'm just using my 2 fingers, or like my pointer finger and my thumb, and releasing my other fingers to gently move the tip. And I want to keep this as small and subtle as possible. So I just do a small, subtle movement. In case you can't see that, the movement is this. I'm basically going a downwards half circle. But I want to keep this as small and subtle as possible. So your goal when you're doing this against someone who's got a sword is you want to get just under their sword. Like stay as close as you can while still being able to get to the other side. And if you want to practice this at home, if you can lay something out straight, like get a broomstick and lay it out horizontally, or even just a slight angle so it's still pointing at you, you can practice disengaging a bit. Let's just practice it again. So just disengaging, just using your thumb and your pointer finger to move the sword and relaxing the other fingers to keep the movement as small as possible. Bouncing back and forth. All right, so let's now try that as a way of moving between hand positions. So I'm going to start in tierce with engaging my opponent instead of engaging my opponent. In tierce guards, so tips are on the center line, hands in line outside the body, palm facing down at 45 degrees. And I want to move to print. So just disengage, print. Disengage back to tierce, disengage to quit, engage back to tier, engage to quit. So you can see occasionally I'll move my hand over, particularly if my opponent has reacted. Sometimes I will get to this quit position and just want to go straight in and actually move back to tiers as I thrust to close the line. Sometimes I won't. It's a bit hard to teach relativistic things that are based on what your opponent does when you don't have an opponent. But let's just practice. So tiers, quit. Tiers, quit. Tiers, quit. Tiers, quit. Tiers, quit. Right. So let's go over to a cart guard or a court guard. And this is a very, very popular movement in épée. This is very much in vogue in the late 19th century. I start in cart, let's disengage and come to 6. Cart, 6. Cart, 6. Cart, 6. Cart, 6. Cart, 6. Cart, 6. All right, so generally with disengagements, you do them in high lines. So cart and 6, tierce and quint. Let's say though I want to go to a low line. So I'm going to try and stab, like, say, finding someone taller than you and you want to stab them under the sword, which I advise you to do against anyone who's taller than you except for me. Don't do that to me. Mostly because I just don't want you to stab me, which is my goal as a fencer. But, you know, if you were to do it, you'd check it probably a bit high. So starting in cart, we're just going to go down, and we're going to go down to 13. Down to 13. Cart, 13. Cart, 13. Cart, 13. Card, 13, card, 13, card, 13, card, 13, card, 13. So that's just a very simple derobement. I'm just changing heights. Let's say, on the other hand, I'm in a tierce guard and my opponent might expect me to, my opponent might expect me to go to second, with fairly intuitive movement on the same side. But I actually want to go to prime. So I'm going to come down. This is still technically derobing. I don't know what the differentiation is. It's weird. So from tiers, just draw a little circle on my tip and come to prime. Tiers, 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 prime. And you can see how I'm actually rolling my stick, like you can see the stick turning. I'm just rolling my stick in my hand to keep this movement very, very subtle. And just to show you that with the sword, very subtle movement. I'm just rolling, and you see that the angle of my blade does actually change, which is not an issue. If it was a cutting sword, yeah, sure, that would be an issue. I need to keep edge level. With a thrusting sword, so long as the point is on line, it's fine. And if you look at the cross section of this blade, this is basically a big spike. It doesn't really have much of a cutting edge. And by the late 19th century, they didn't have any cutting edges at all. You do see earlier small swords where the top third is a cutting edge to basically stop the opponent from grabbing the blade. But when you're getting into late 19th century where this is purely a dueling weapon, they don't even worry about that because, you know, someone grabbing your blade is dishonorable and therefore unlikely, and also exceedingly dangerous and therefore unlikely. Right. So let's say I'm in, let's go 6, and my opponent is holding their sword quite high. They're doing like more of a foil guard type thing, but their tip is really, really up. And this is particularly useful if we're this is also particularly useful against people who are using a cut and thrust sword. So if someone's got like, you know, a saber guard like this, where it is much higher, I'm going to cut over. I'm just going to do a semicircle up. And this one is at a bit more of an angle, I find. I find you want to retract your tip a little to make it more like a cut in how you do it. If you can see that, I'll just move back and hopefully you can see my tip is moving up slightly. So, from a medium guard or from a 6 guard, just cut over to cut. Cut over back to 6, cut over to cut, over back to 6, cut over to cut, over back to 6, cut over to cut, over back to 6, cut over to cart, and back to 6. So these sort of 3 movements are very, very key for changing position. And where they get quite important is in what we call counter parries and semi-counters. So the idea behind a counter parry is I've come on guard, let's say I've come on guard in cart. My opponent decides that they're going to attack me, but even they're going to change lines to attack me. I'm like, you know what? I really like fencing out of cart. It works for me. What I do is I do a full disengage. I do a full circle with my tip after my opponent changes line. And what that should do is collect their sword and bring it back to the cart position where I've already formed an engagement. And then from there, I can quickly parry and then thrust them. And so these circular parries or counter parries are very, very good for basically setting the tone of the fight. And when you get to late 19th century, counter parries are considered kind of the primary form of parrying. So I'm in cart. I dip my tip. My opponent disengages. I dip my tip down to come under their sword. I'm forming basically the angle of 17. I just whip my tip back up to cart. And what I want to do is I actually want to draw an angular circle, like a 45 degree angle in front of me. I don't want to just disengage, do basically a flat circle, because that means I'm dragging my opponent's tip across my body. But I want to dip down. And from here, when I get to about here, I'm already creating an angle with my sword that will guide my opponent's blade up to my hilt, where I want it for parrying purposes. And then every other position, and then the more movement I get out of them is basically great. So very, very fine sort of movement. So from card, disengage, and counter parry. This is parry of counter card. Counter parry, counter parry, counter parry, counter parry, and counter parry. And something you can do with these to practice time is actually practice them in a mirror, or like I use my windows at night because that's as good as a mirror, as a way of just seeing how finely you can do this. Because in the absence of having someone do it back to you, it's a bit hard to kind of get a sense of the dynamic. But the smaller movements you can make instinctively, the easier it'll be to adapt defensively. Now, let's say I'm in engagement 6, and I want to stay in this engagement. So my opponent disengages into card. So I just drop my tip down and then circle it back to 6. So drop down, circle it back to 6. And you notice with all of these, the circle, after you drop your tip down, the circle always goes in towards the center line. So when I'm in cart, drop my tip down, circle goes to center line. When I'm in 6, I drop my tip, circle goes towards the center line. If I do this, all I'm really doing is opening myself up more. Instead, I want to drop and circle. Drop and circle inwards. Drop and circle inwards. So from 6, circling, counter 6. Counter 6. Counter 6. Counter 6. Counter 6. Counter 6. And counter 6. All right. So those are the main 2 kinds of counter parries that you see in FA. I mean, I'm not going to go through them all just because it's going to be a very, very long night. That's kind of more like I can get into a lesson, or at least a lesson that we can reasonably do in the time we have. But what I want you to do when you're going home as homework is start experimenting with those. Start experimenting with transitions, experimenting with counter parries from different hand positions, and see what works for you and see what's good for you. Because I deliberately, when I teach, I don't spell everything out for everyone, because if you get too used to me explaining everything, I find it kind of takes some of the fun of discovery out of it. But also I find that being able to sort of self-teach a bit and kind of improvise, go, oh, I know how to do this technique and this technique. So if I kind of combine a bit of both if I know this technique's a bit of both and I combine it, you can kind of learn to improvise on the fly. So that's kind of a good sort of exercise to do at home as well as you're practicing this. All right, so I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to check. Is there any questions before I pause recording? Looking like no. Okay.